All right, welcome back to our 11 o'clock session of the 2026 Religion, Culture, and Diversity Symposium. My name is Brian Birch. I'm the director of the Religious Studies program, and I want to thank everyone who was involved in preparing and participating in this conference. These are timely and important issues, and we really appreciate people taking time to share their expertise with you. So we're live streaming the event. We're also recording and we're hosting in person. So if there are any sessions that you missed but would like to go online and see, you can just visit the UVU Religious Studies YouTube channel. And those are posting right after each session. So we invite you to go back and review or catch sessions that you didn't otherwise attend. I also want to remind students, if you're here getting credit or extra credit for a class, there are QR codes on the sides of the rooms. Your instructors would appreciate you signing in and identifying your class and identifying which sessions you attended, and we'll make sure to get that to your instructors. So we appreciate you helping us out there. We're very honored this morning to hear from two important um, scholars and journalistic leaders in our community. We're going to first hear from David Noyce, who is the managing editor for the Salt Lake Tribune. He also co-hosts the Mormon Land podcast. I hope some of you have heard of the Mormon Land podcast, uh, which David will be talking about this morning. He's been at the Salt Lake Tribune for 42 years. Is that number correct? That's what I thought you told me last night. He has seen all the twists and turns and ups and downs of local journalism, but the value of the Salt Lake Tribune in this community can scarcely be overstated. And our community owes a lot of that to David and his intrepid colleagues who have kept that newspaper viable and relevant and important. And so I applaud him publicly for that. One of the areas David has overseen is religion reporting, among many other areas, and has many interesting stories in terms of covering religion in this community, which, as many of you know, is can be a challenge, but also a great opportunity. So we'll first hear from David. The title of his remarks is "What Mormon Land Delivers That Other Podcasts Do Not." And then our second presenter will be my colleague and friend here at UVU, Dr. David Scott. David is a professor of communication here at UVU, my co-host for this event. Thank you, David, for helping us put this together. He's also the editor of the Journal of Media and Religion, which is one of the most important journals in this academic field. So if you would like and get a chance, please look at the contents of that journal. Um, after David Noyce presents, David Scott will present remarks entitled "Bad Press or Public Service?" Question mark, navigating news coverage of religion in the U.S. So please join me in welcoming David Noyce.
Thanks, Brian. You're taller than me. I hope you don't mind a break from slides. Okay. I've actually been a journalist and at the Salt Lake Tribune long enough that I actually got to utter the words at about 2:30 in the morning, "Stop the press." Most of you do not even know what a press is. But I actually did get to utter those words once. But I'm going to get modern now for you. I want you to get out your phones, go to your favorite, AI thing and chat GPT, whatever. And I want you to put in a prompt that's essentially like this. Ask your prompt, what is the audience for the Salt Lake Tribune's Mormon Land podcast? and then I would love you to share what some of you get. You'll get a string of things, of course, but someone be bold and be brave and be first. Brian's got a mic, but
Get,
get one?
is it worthwhile to pass this around?
Go ahead.
Members of the LDS Church, former or questioning members, scholars, and journalists interested in religion, general listeners curious about Mormon culture.
Good. That's what my wife got too, essentially. Anyone else get anything different? Right there.
Mine includes active members, which wasn't mentioned on the list before.
Any others? Joel, you have one?
Specific niche audience interested in news, culture, and debates surrounding the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And they have overlapping groups, and they have a lot more, but I won't go through all those overlapping.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I got one that I really liked because I think it's what we were trying to accomplish. Listeners who want thoughtful religion journalism and nuanced discussions rather than purely devotional content. That was really what we set out to do. Peggy Fletcher Stack, my senior religion reporter, I actually have two other religion reporters now, which is almost unheard of across the country, but we do live in Utah, where religion is a story. We're dragged into podcasting, kicking and screaming, the proverbial kicking and screaming. We're much more comfortable with writing stories, editing stories, publishing stories. But our editor at the time, Jennifer Napier Pierce, in radio for a long time and wanted us to start a podcast. And we did. Our very first podcast was in September of 2017. Our first interview was with Tom Christofferson, who is an openly gay brother of Latter-day Saint Apostle D. Todd Christofferson. He was our very first guest. Peggy and I agreed to do this, but we set ground rules. This is what we wanted our podcast to be. First of all, it would not be Crossfire. It would not be Face the Nation. It would not be Meet the Press. It would not be, in other words, gotcha or grillings of our guests. And we did this because as we cover religion, which we've been doing for decades now, especially here in Utah, we're talking about really sensitive matters that are close to people's hearts. And we wanted to always treat our guests and their beliefs with respect. We did not want our podcast to be a test of Mormonism's truth claims, nor a testimonial of those claims. Above all, and this is what I think what separates us, we wanted to be topical. There are, as was pointed out, Kristen, tons of podcasts, so many, and in the Mormon space, a lot. You'll see everything from how should I teach the Sunday school class this week to essentially anti-Mormon podcasts. We wanted to be topical because we're journalists. We cover the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the appendages to it, its culture, its teachings, as a story, as a news story. Our podcast is not heavily produced. Peggy and I are essentially the producers. We research, we script, we book guests, and we don't usually do it like weeks in advance because we want to be topical. So this week we'll be airing our 431st podcast. It's on every single week. And I think there's only 1 or 2 weeks where we did not have a fresh podcast. We do have people who take care of the sound as best they can of the quality. But for all of the people on the Tribune staff, this is not our specialty. We like to consider our podcast the rawness of it part of its charm. But there are some problems sometimes with our production. Peggy and I, when we had our 300th podcast, we did a live episode, and we talked about sex in Mormonism. And we had a live audience, more than like 150 people at the university. And no, it was at the library. That one was at the library. That's right. And one of the things I told the audience, I'm just going to say to you, it's our podcast is about our guests. They're the ones who make it work. It is their insights, their expertise, their perspectives, their stories that make Mormon Land meaningful. And we're especially grateful for our audience who put up with a couple of print people stammering and stumbling and striving to become more adept at this new medium. Let's talk about the name. Someone asked about self-identification. If you heard what I said, our first podcast and the name emerged in 2017. That was a couple of years before the president of the church at the time, Russell Nelson, declared his edict of trying to get rid of using the word Mormon. We had a debate within our newsroom as to what we should do. We polled our listeners. 85% of them, our listeners and our readers in this sense, did not want us to change it. As a matter of fact, many of them said if we did, they would stop listening, which should tell you a little bit about our audience too. So we do, however, follow AP style on the use of the word Mormon. First of all, Mormon Land is a proper noun. It's our branding product. It remains far more recognizable for those less familiar with the church, especially internationally. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not translate well globally. And in a faith that's growing fastest globally and in the global south, that's really important to us. We cover a multitude of faith traditions that trace back to LDS church founder Joseph Smith. We always use the full name of the church. In all of our stories, we spell the full name of the church correctly. And I want you, when you read your media, see how many don't. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, uppercase is the in the name. It has been that way throughout my journalistic career. This is not new. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, I could go on, even Religion News Service does not. We reserve using LDS, which a lot of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints don't understand, is just as frowned upon using LDS as Mormon. But we use LDS. The only place we allow it is in our headlines for obvious reasons. Space constraints come into play. We only use Mormonism to describe the culture or the overall theology. If anyone has a really good word that could cover all of that, we are definitely open to ideas. Okay. I want to give you an idea of some of our content. Okay. And then I'd like to hear any questions you might have. We covered the culture. Of late, we've been covering a lot about clothing that Latter-day Saints wear underneath their clothes. How many of you know that Latter-day Saints wear something that they call garments? We're in Utah, so I expect a lot of people know that. How many of you know about the new kinds of garments? Sleeveless, right? Along with slips and other things. We've been writing a lot about that, and we've taken some criticism for this. But our view was, this is a story, this is something everyone's talking about. If it's not reflected in the press, then we're not doing our job. And we wrote a story when they finally went on sale here in Utah. And we posted our story in the morning because we knew they were going on sale, and the stores were packed. And almost all of them only knew it because of our story. So that's something we've been writing about. So the culture, because there's definitely a unique culture here. We found a lot of our listeners are interested in the history of the church. The church is young, not even quite 200 years old. Has a very well documented history, actually, and more documentation continues to come out. We have talked to scholars we talked to Matt Harris about a liberal apostle, U.B. Brown. We've talked with Ben Park, respected historian. Richard Bushman, sort of the dean now of the historians. Matthew Bowman, Quincy Newell, John Turner, Jennifer Reeder, Kathleen Holbrook. We did podcasts when American Primeval came out. Did any of you see American Primeval? A few of you did. Separating Fact and Fiction in American Primeval. We did several shows on Under the Banner of Heaven. How many of you have either read the book or seen that? See, we're showing our age, some of us, aren't we? We did Separating Fact and Fiction on that, okay? We do get into politics. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between politics and religion now, as it's been discussed already. We had the final extended interview with Harry Reid before he died, who was actually the highest ranking elected Latter-day Saint in U.S. history when he became the Senate Majority Leader. We've had open invitations to Mitt Romney for quite a while, but we've talked to McKay Coppins, who wrote a biography of him. We had a podcast where we had Latter-day Saints for Biden and Latter-day Saints for Trump, representatives of those two groups. But we had strict ground rules. This is not going to be crossfire. This is not going to be going back and forth. And the guests honored that and just made their cases. So we've talked about political scientists, many from BYU, other places, about political alliances and allegiances. We write a lot about and have had podcasts about education, especially the LDS Church's flagship campus at BYU, and what some say as a retrenchment going on there. We focus on marginalized communities too, LGBTQ+. We've had plenty of podcasts on that. This week's podcast will be with Troy Williams, who is leaving Equality Utah as the director after 14 years there. He's a former Mormon. Black Latter-day Saints. Peggy and I took on a cause of representing Black voices in Latter-day Saints several years before Black Lives Matter, the police shootings, those things. That became a somewhat of a journalistic cause of ours of making sure those voices were represented, immigrants and women. We also cover church finances. We've had podcasts on that. Lawsuits the LDS Church has faced over its tithing practices, its alliances with the NAACP. We cover big happenings in the church. General Conference is coming up. We have that. We have a special section we do before every single General Conference. We've covered disaffected Mormons, people who have left the faith. One of our most popular was Valerie and Nathan Hamaker, who had a podcast called Latter-day Struggles, who ended up resigning their membership. We've talked to disciplined members of the church, including Sonia Johnson and Kate Kelly. We've tried a number of times, and we've have open invitations to the top church leaders to come on our podcast. I've written many of those. We've only had, however, one general authority on the podcast, Steve Snow, now an emeritus general authority. We see our podcast as an extension of the Tribune's coverage. And we are not the Desert News. We are not the church-owned organ. We are an independent voice. And we cover the church as the major institution and influencer it is in this state. We have a general rule of we don't criticize doctrines and beliefs, as I already stated, but we cover them as topics of discussion there and debate within the and outside the church. For instance, the church's former practice of polygamy continues to have an effect, especially on women today within the church. So we talk about that. Those are the things that Mormon Land strives to do. Some are better than others. Kim is just walking in. She was on our podcast. She had a great project she did with students, and we covered that. Um, I just would like to hear some questions, take some questions, see what you guys all might have on your mind. I'm open to criticism, okay? And the Tribune's open to criticism. I get it every day in my email. All right. When Joel said, I think you said something to the effect of the credo of you don't want anyone to ever like the story too much, which basically means everyone's going to not like something in the story. So that's the other interpretation. So I'll be glad to take some questions.
David, thanks for your work. I'd be interested to hear I'd be interested to hear you highlight maybe a criticism you received or some backlash you received that was, that was very memorable to you, that you remember working through, and how did it go? And just sharing some of that with us, some of that personal torment maybe that comes up as you do your job.
Yes. Specifically in relation to this, not our coverage of the legislature or something, but okay, because we certainly get those too. One of the recent ones, we did a podcast. I did it with Tamara Kemsley, my other religion reporter, where we talked with a Latter-day Saint who's a former Muslim, and we did it soon after the Israeli and Gaza war broke out. And that we got some just criticism on that, because some of the views that our guests gave, we probably needed to press a little bit more. Like I said, we don't want it to be grillings of things, but we do want to make sure that we fairly represent or ask obvious questions sometimes from what the guests might say. That's one. However, I do get emails virtually about the name still, virtually several every month now. It used to be a lot more. And I respond to every single one unless they're really foul and crude. I have, however, also had to report some to police because they cross a line of threats. So that's the world the media lives in right now. So that's one. Sometimes I think that one of the main criticisms we get is people want us to put the Mormon Church's truth claims on trial. They want us to, well, what about this? Joseph Smith was a money digger, blah, blah, blah. This. True, we've had shows on that. But we're not there to do that. We're not there to do the church's testimonial work. We're not there to put truth claims on trial. First of all, because every religion has truth claims that can't be proved. That's the basis of faith, correct? That's probably the most common.
David, why don't we hold questions for the end? We'll have David present. If we have time, then we'll do it. Please join me in thanking David.
Thanks, David. I teach a class here at Utah Valley University called Mormons, Media, and Popular Culture. And so oftentimes I see students express concern about media coverage, obviously, of many things. Trust of the media is an all-time low, but primarily because of the subject of the course about religion. And I thought one thing that we're lacking then is to understand the context in which sometimes media is covered in our culture. So I thought it would be interesting and important to look a little bit more into sort of the cultural news as a cultural artifact that reflects cultural norms and biases that just in some ways can't always be helped because again we're all a product of our culture and our worldviews. So I don't know if any of you in here, many of you students in here remember Mitt Romney's campaigning for president, but his religion was very important at the time, and there was this notation of this belief system that we were living in what was called a Mormon moment, and a lot of Latter-day Saints were really excited because, right, a lot of press coverage about the faith and the people, but at the same time there was a lot of suspicion and cause for concern because everybody was fearful about how the press would cover that. There was a documentary. Whoops, what just happened? There we go. There was a documentary that was aired on NBC just before the elections when Mitt Romney was a finalist running against Obama at the time. And it featured the Jackson family, an African American father and his spouse and their Latter-day Saint family. These folks were my neighbors. They lived right behind my house, so I knew them reasonably well. And I would tease Al during that election season because I asked him if his, African American heritage made him want Obama to win, or his Latter-day Saint culture made him want Romney to win, and how was he dealing with that stress? So I just want to share just their comments about that broadcast immediately after it took place, and I'm only going to share just a few minutes with that, and hopefully the sound is going to work because it was pretty low earlier. Let's see.
Good evening. You may have just finished watching it. Mormon in America on Rock Center with Brian Williams.
What'd you think? One of the couples featured in the broadcast lives in Lehigh, and our religion specialist, Carol Makita, watched the program with them. Carol, what was their reaction?
Well, I think they were pleased and a bit disappointed that after all of the days that the crew spent following this family, that there wasn't a little bit more in it. But let me introduce you to Julene and Al Jackson and their 5 beautiful children. So overall, Julene, what were your thoughts?
Well, I think that there were some positive aspects of it. I always am concerned when they focus on circumstances or situations that are kind of the exception or the fringe element of the faith. I think 98% of the members of this church are indicative of how our family is, but they seem to focus more on the 2% that are disenfranchised at some level. And so I always go, oh, because they spent 3 days with us. And so we know what they saw and what they could have highlighted. And it seemed like it was a little superficial in some of the clips they did on us and a little bit more in depth in those that were.
Did you feel good about how your family was portrayed, Al?
I wish they had shared more in-depth things, as my wife just said, about what they did with the kind of the 2%ers and the folks that are disenfranchised. Come here, sweetheart. But I wish they had shown more of our kids because that's really who we are.
I thought Kayla did very well answering tough questions about dating, that sort of thing.
Right, she did great. She did.
Okay, there we go. So the crew spent 3 days with this family, but they also interviewed, one of the actors from the Book of Mormon play, an openly gay Latter-day Saint whose parents were on a mission, and they interviewed, oh shoot, what was her name? Her father was our what was his name? The former ambassador to China. Huntsman, thank you. Huntsman's daughter, Abby Huntsman, thank you. And she spoke about her own experience. She had a negative experience with her local leader, and who told her not to date a non-member. And so, right, so the story shared, right, they gave context, history, polygamy, of course, but they also talked about the church's welfare system and so on. But you can see what happens, right? People want to see their faith, their tradition, their belief systems in the best light. And they assume that the rest of the Latter-day Saints all see the world the same way they do, right? We're the 98 percenters. It's only those 2% who have different points of view. So I want to look a little bit at how our sort of cultural norms are impacting that. If you look at American culture, particularly since World War II, when the veterans started coming back from the war, there was a lot of cynicism that they had experienced as a result of this war, and trust in institutions and materialistic values were supplanted by a shift towards self-expression and emphasis on individualism. And that transition also applied not only toward distrust of institutions in general, but more specifically distrust of religious institutions in particular. So if you look at this, this graphic here, you can see the blue line is just since the early 70s. Levels of trust toward institutions in general is the blue line, and trust toward religious institutions or organized religion on the bottom line. Oftentimes, we conflate institutional religion, that would be like denominational religion and churches. Those get conflated with people of faith and personal religiosity or personal religious practice. And if we don't separate those two, we tend to start misunderstanding how that is covered by the media and how that reflects cultural values. So this emphasis on personal religiosity kind of shifted over time and led to, in our culture, again, distrust of authority figures, suspicion of these of ideas or beliefs that are absolutes. Okay, so this notion that if someone makes absolutist claims about their faith or beliefs, we tend to distrust those people, right? Now we're seeing just people, I don't know, maybe we're going back to absolutes with social media. And that religion is seen as valid not for its message or its ideology or theology, but instead its instrumentality, its ability to help people be better to their neighbors and to people around them, right? So religion is good when it feeds the poor. Religion isn't good when it tells us only the Bible is the word of God. Does that make sense? Okay. That is sort of the culture that we are living in today. And so one of the things we've talked about in earlier sessions is this has led in part to the rise of what we call the nuns, the people surveyed by Pew who, when asked about their religious affiliation, say they are not affiliated with any particular faith tradition. And so over time, we are seeing, again, fewer people practicing religion at the denominational level in churches and shifting it instead away to religion as a personal belief system. And in fact, you've probably heard people say, I'm spiritual but not religious, right? This is a common cultural norm now, which again is to distrust organized religion and institutions, but still, Americans, a significant majority of Americans still believe in an afterlife, God, that there are, the supernatural. And so the majority of Americans are, still very, very religious. And so we have a culture in which the majority of people believe in the supernatural and an afterlife and a God of one form or another, maybe not the biblical Jesus or so on, but they believe in something, but they don't trust organized religion. And so the research that I have done over the years has looked at how, given that journalists themselves are a part of that culture, how is that reflected in journalistic coverage of religion? And so I thought what we could do is look at some examples from news magazine covers. Magazines are these things on paper that you turn like this. They're really fascinating. You can't like zip through the stories this way. And so, of course, storytelling oftentimes involves conflict. So clearly, when a religious organization or denomination is involved in a scandal, you are going to get, right? You're going to get cover stories on this. Okay, so here we go. These examples during the controversy around the Catholic Church and child abuse. But there are some other examples as well. So again, all of these stories are about conflict, right? People who are competing ideologies. The idea of um, America, music and movies harming American soul, according to some religious people. The wars about teaching science and evolution in school. Again, currently we have schools that are mandating the Ten Commandments, for example, be displayed in the schools. That creates conflict. That's clearly, it's also a First Amendment issue, so it's going to create more news coverage. But again, if we're looking at sort of the negative press, what we find is that the negative press about religion is often not going to be about people's personal religious beliefs. We respect individuality. We respect people's beliefs, but instead it's a challenge tied to denominations. So here we go. When George W. Bush was elected, there were a lot of stories looking at the impact of evangelicals and politicking there that helped him get elected. Notice that in this case, God and money, right? We're seeing religious symbols being flattened and integrating with money. So why is God and money a bad thing? Well, in our culture, right, we distrust people with greed and who use money to take advantage of people or religion to take advantage of people and so on. Here, this portrayal of Ralph Reed, the right hand of God, his Christian coalition on a crusade to take over U.S. politics, and it's working, right? So there's another right red flag we're seeing. So you'll notice these covers very dark, foreboding, and suggesting some of the bad things that can take place because of denominational worship. Here's a couple of other examples. Right after 9/11, we have this story here: should Christians convert Muslims? Uh, a new flock of missionaries launched a campaign to take the gospel to Islamic countries. Here, time always ends with a question, but will they inspire more backlash than belief? So just by posing that question, right, they've now framed that mission of Christians to go into the Muslim community as one that will likely inspire backlash and create problems. Notice too, as you look carefully at this, that the cross is being wielded here like a weapon, like a sword, right? And so rather than a story just about Christians who want to share their message in other worlds and taking it from their perspective, you see this notion of conflict and Christianity being a problem. Same with this Newsweek article here. So those are all examples of news magazine covers that demonstrate ways in which institutional religion is a little sus, to use the words of my 15-year-old son. Maybe that was from 2 years ago, I'm not sure. I just know I won't say 6, 7. I don't know what that's all about. On the other hand, because again, we live in a culture that's dominated by people with faith and belief in an afterlife, it would be counterproductive, going back to Kristen's presentation, for journalists and news magazines who want to sell advertising, audiences to advertisers, to critique or attack the readers, right? Who are the vast majority of them of whom are believers of some type. So I thought I would share just a summary of some of these articles when they're talking about personal religiosity. So notice here we have these magazines talking about faith and spirituality. The Time magazine here, how faith can heal. The other Time magazine, this woman here who's wearing gauze, and then she has this stuff wrapped around her, looks kind of like angelic wings. She looks like an angel. Faith and healing, can spirituality promote health? Doctors are finding some surprising evidence, right? So here we're literally taking a belief system and it's being supported by medicine, by science. Okay. Over here, God and health, is religion good medicine? And Newsweek, again, why science is starting to believe. So here we have stories about faith and belief in an afterlife. And not only are these covers more positive, but they are also, right, tend to support this idea that these beliefs, that personal spiritual beliefs are actually supported or valuable, right? Religion valued by its, right, what it can do, are valuable, and science and doctors back that up. By the way, quick question, and I found this in this research over a whole decade of stories about personal versus institutional religion in time in particular. What do all those covers have in common? They're women. That's right. So most frequently, when these magazines displayed or wanted to portray the notion of faith and personal religiosity as a positive thing, those portray women. Women are spiritual. Men are part of the institution. Men are the threat. Men are more frightening, which is probably true. It's why they have sister missionaries at BYU. I mean, Temple Square, sorry, Temple Square, right? And so perhaps, if this is too subtle, we can look at this one here. So this Newsweek came out literally when I was coming back from a conference talking about this subject, and I was like, oh, why didn't I have that cover in my research? Forget the church, follow Jesus. Cover story on Newsweek magazine. Another Newsweek here, right? Spirituality in America. Notice again the language, what we believe, how we pray, where we find God. Language is very inclusive. We are all a part of this group of believers versus them, they, who are going to try and convert Muslims, they who are interjecting money into politics, and so on. So the final thing that I noticed in my research is that our emphasis on personal religiosity and spirituality, even political candidates, once they become finalists, the news coverage about them tends to be more positive. So here is an example. So when Obama was elected as president, suddenly instead of critiquing or challenging religion, right, Newsweek runs a cover story, what he believes. When George W. Bush was elected, you can see the headline here. It talks about how faith changed his life and shapes his presidency, right? And then the Oval Office here, this other story, you can see this light shining down into the office. Again, both Bush and Obama look very prayerful, meditative, right? Not threatening at all. Very, right? Very positive sort of language about religion. So when religion worked its way into the White House, at least with prior presidents, again, we're not going to attack or critique the personal religiosity of these leaders. I want to compare that, by the way, that one of Bush and God, how God, uh, it does say how his God talk worries friends and foes, but again, how faith changed his life and shapes his presidency. Now, I'm going to contrast that with the same Newsweek that was published the same week in the UK. So you can see how American culture about religion is different than British culture about religion. Here's the one from the UK. Bush and God, how faith changes life and shapes his agenda. Right? So he went from how it shapes his presidency to how it shapes his agenda. And of course, now the image isn't him in a meditative, prayerful state, but instead he looks right. He looks like a preacher who is like telling people what to believe. And so, with that distinction between personal and institutional religiosity in the UK is not as strong as it is in the United States. Religion is definitely seen in more critical ways in the UK and the rest of Europe. Finally, I just want to talk again about how, and I mentioned this before, but science is used as a means of endorsing spiritual or personal religiosity in these images. There we go. The God gene. Does our DNA compel us to seek a higher power? Believe it or not, some scientists say yes. And then there's a quiz. How spiritual are you? See, take the quiz. Nobody wants to fail a quiz, right? How spiritual are you? So if you're successful, that's good. How we're wired for spirituality. These came out at the same time. What does science tell us about God? Time Magazine. Science finds God in Newsweek that same week. Okay, so let's bring it home. Let's talk a little bit about the Latter-day Saint Church, Salt Lake City. So when Romney was running the first time around, there were a lot of stories that emphasized the church as the institutional church rather than believers within the faith. And but then when Mitt Romney was finally a finalist for a finalist candidate, you'll see that the covers changed. So here are the early covers, right? Mormons, a changing but mysterious religion gets ready for its Olympic close-up, right? Um, I don't know why they have the women wearing the white shirts too, but you'll notice they all kind of look very they all look almost like, the Stepford families, right? They're all dressed the same. They're a little menacing. It's a little bit dark. Okay. Mormons Incorporated, The Secrets of America's Most Prosperous Religion. That story was actually written by a Latter-day Saint, but the cover, right? This notion of Mormonism tied primarily to its money. And again, we don't like mixing money and politics. And so all of these covers, even though the stories may not have been quite as exaggerated, tend to focus on, the religion is mysterious, secretive, and dangerous, right? And powerful. Okay. Here we go. But then, and then Mitt Romney was a finalist. Earlier on in the campaign, we had the Mormon Moment Newsweek story about Mitt Romney and his religion. But look what happened when he really was the finalist. Here it's the Mormon identity, and the story here was really about how, again, Mitt Romney's faith shapes his values and so forth. And so the cover story and Mitt Romney here now is seen not as this kind of secretive part of a secretive group of right, of clones, but instead he's framed by there's the angel Moroni there, but also a colored church window, stained glass window, which in many ways, right, broadens his appeal beyond the Latter-day Saint tradition, and instead it shows him as a fellow believer like other Americans. And that is what I have to share. Does anybody want to ask any questions? If we have, I guess we don't have time, do we, Brian?
We do. We have about 4 minutes, but I'd invite students to ask questions of either of the Davids.
Yes.
And then I just want to alert everyone that the next hour, we're going to have a panel discussion with all the presenters from today. So if you want to linger for that, we'd be happy to have you there. Questions?
David and I did such a good job. We answered all your questions.
Okay, please join me in thanking them. Next hour, we'll have pizza as well, since it's lunchtime.